4 weeks ago, Jesus was born. 3 weeks ago, Jesus was perhaps 2 years old when the wise men visited. Last week, Jesus was an adult and went to the river to be baptized by John. And this week, Jesus begins his public ministry. I told you that Mark's favorite word is immediately, and there is no time to waste. Jesus is on the move. Jesus is in Capernaum, a lovely little town on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. The village was small and served as a home base for the fisher folk who plied the waters to make a living. It's just down the road from Magdala, where a woman named Mary lived. On the slopes rising from the town are orange and lemon groves, where once sat a vast multitude listening to Jesus preach his Sermon on the Mount. It is the Sabbath day, and Jesus, being a faithful Jew, went to the synagogue. This is an important detail. On the Sabbath, the day of rest, no work could be done. Sabbath restrictions governed everything from how much one could do without calling it work to how far one could walk without calling it travel. Jesus is in the synagogue, the ruins of which you can still see when you visit. When a man with an unclean spirit disrupts the service, he confronts Jesus, calling him the Holy One of God. Jesus tells the man to be quiet, because in Mark's gospel, Jesus' identity as the Messiah is a guarded secret. Jesus shouts down the man, and as he does, the unclean spirit leaves the man, and the congregation is amazed. When the morning service was over, Peter invites Jesus to his house, which is right across the street from the synagogue. They've built a church over the remains of Peter's house, though you can still see the humble place where the fishermen lived. They arrive to find out that Peter's mother-in-law has taken ill and is in bed with a fever. That may not sound life-threatening to you and me, but in those days, a fever could kill. There were no aspirin or antibiotics to heal. Jesus went in to where she was, took her by the hand, lifted her up, and the fever left her. If you grew up in a small town, you know that word travels fast. If you cast out an unclean spirit and heal someone's mother-in-law in the morning, by afternoon, everyone knows about it. The same was true for Jesus. By sundown, another important detail, all the sick and possessed were at Peter's door, looking for Jesus and a healing. And Jesus healed many of them, Mark's gospel tells us. Where there was brokenness, Jesus brought wholeness. And Mark tacks on another story of another healing. This time Jesus heals a leper. Any skin condition of Jesus' day was called leprosy. It does not necessarily mean the condition we know today as leprosy. But leprosy carried with it no small number of laws and restrictions. Still, Jesus healed the man. Now consider, please, Jesus healed on the Sabbath, in contradiction of Sabbath laws prohibiting work. Jesus touched and healed a woman who was not a member of his family, in direct contradiction of the laws and customs regarding how a man interacts with a woman who is not a member of his family. Jesus interacted with the sick, the dying, and those presenting various forms of mental illness in direct disobedience of the laws and customs regarding interaction with the sick and dying. Jesus broke the law. It's just that simple. Jesus disobeyed and dismissed the laws that prevented him from doing acts of compassion and kindness. Jesus saw that treating another human being in less than a human way was to deface the image of God in which all people are created. The law would have to wait. Grace demanded action. On January the 26th, 1956, Martin Luther King Jr. was arrested for the first time, speaking out in favor of those who were encouraging a boycott of the bus service because the buses were segregated. 4 days later, his home was bombed. Later that year, the Supreme Court ruled that bus segregation was unconstitutional. King was the first to ride a bus when segregation was lifted. King and those who worked with him worked for equal justice for all, but they broke a lot of laws along the way. Those laws were unjust, grounded in prejudice, and sought to perpetuate inequality. Their civil disobedience and nonviolence were grounded in the principle that all people are created in God's own image, regardless of the color of their skin, and that all people were created to enjoy the same rights and privileges that were given to only a few. It took years, and the struggle still goes on, but the law would have to wait. Grace demanded action. This morning, new elders, deacons, and trustees will take up the work of leading this congregation. They will be governed by the Constitution of our church, a grand collection of wisdom and rules that have guided the Presbyterian Church on these shores for over 231 years. Some of those rules are good and fair and just. Others are not. More persuasive than our rules are our customs and traditions. In some areas of our life, we do things simply because we've always done them. No one knows when we started doing things in a particular way or even why we do them in a particular way. We just know that's what we're supposed to do, and that's how we're supposed to do it. And just in case you haven't noticed, across the country and around the world, the church is moving through a time of cataclysmic change. That will not end any time soon. We will ride the waves of church change for a very long time. These good people, who God has called through the voice of this congregation, will be leading us through these times of change. It will not be easy. They will confront the way it's always been, more times than they can even begin to know. And we will ask them to discern a new way. Their governing principle and ours must be grace over laws. How do we show God's grace to a world that can sing about it, but knows very little about which they sing? How do we intentionally honor and respect all people as created in the image of God when the world tells us that some people are better than others and that those who are different are the cause of everything that is bad? How do we stand up and stand for the poor when so many seek to profit from oppressing them? How do we make the good news of Jesus Christ real to a generation and more of people who think the good news means mistreatment, injustice, violence, greed, and falsehood? Laws and rules and customs will have to wait. Grace demands action. From my reading of the scriptures, it tells me that Jesus never walked around on eggshells. It seems that Jesus was always bold, always courageous, always challenging the status quo. Jesus' commitment to the way of God was absolute and unwavering. Jesus showed God's love for all people in everything he did. And there is our guide too. As members of the church, as leaders of the church, as disciples of Jesus Christ, we are called to show God's love for all people in everything we do. We are called to walk the way of grace. We are commissioned to let the light of love shine into the darkest corners of our world. We are sent to bring healing to the world, mending the brokenness into wholeness. We are called to be healed and to heal for now and evermore. Amen.